And then as soon as we get that hosted somewhere, it just says it's just like an opt-in. It's not super complicated. I'll make another
set up this afternoon on recession proof.
Awesome
Class.
Yeah. Yep. All right, let me get this shared in the group, and then we're gonna jam. I'm super stoked. One of those things, man, that's just so. You know how much money I would have if somebody would have taught me something like this at some point, like, I don't know, in the last 7 years. Financial prepare for sports analogies. All right, now let me get in the group because that's where the magic happens. All right, we're live. We'll jam. We'll wait for a minute, let people get in here. How's the weather up there?
It's definitely Seattle spring. So one moment it's like beautiful and gorgeous, and you're like, oh, thank God it's here, like so nice weather. And then 20 seconds later, you're like, how is it pouring? Wasn't it just really nice out? I swear it was just really nice out. So yeah, it's up and down.
I remember I actually worked at Red Lobster in Edmonds. No, Linwood, right off of that exit. And I would be like, oh my God, it's nice out. I get somebody to cover my shift. And by the time somebody covers my shift, I look up and I'm like, oh man, I should have went to work.
Yeah, sounds about right.
Yeah. Cool. So we'll start jamming because we're getting people dropping in here. Again, what I try to do for our ecosystem, our little corner of the internet, and our Vault members is we have a little thing called the secret weapon trainings. And the only reason they're all secrets is like it's not always sexy on the surface. It's not two-step funnel that's going to generate $500,000 and it's not laptop lifestyle, right? But it is the most important things that I think business owners need to know, whether they are getting into business tomorrow or they've been in business for 10 years. And you have one of those skill sets, and you understand the thing that, like, the hardest thing for us visionaries, right? Because we just want to buy everything, and we figure we're stubborn enough to figure out how to make it add up, right? Sure. And then we talk to finance people, and their brain works differently, and it's maddening because they work with it's like the science of hindsight, right? There's not a whole lot of visionary stuff going on. So I'm making decisions on potential. And when I meet finance people, one, they operate by the numbers. They don't understand how my brain works. And honestly, it's kind of like, F it. I don't even want to talk to those people.
Sure. Yeah.
And what you do, and I just want to talk about your skill set for a minute outside of the numbers, is you understand how my brain works, how a visionary, an agency owner, any business owner, you understand how they operate and how they set goals and how to help them reach those goals. But you also have an understanding of the numbers, right? And what you do so well is take this understanding, like, how do you what do you want out of life? Like you ask somebody like me, what do you want out of life, first of all, so that we can come up with a plan, and all of your decisions are kind of made within that framework.
Yep.
Right. So you want to go off and do this thing, that's cool, but it doesn't lead to the thing you told me you wanted. And you kind of act as I use the analogy of bumpers all the time. Like help somebody understand what they really want, and then help them make business decisions that facilitate the life that they want. And that's a unique skill set. Not a lot of technician people can do that. And so I just wanted to make that introduction to my people that are watching, because we kind of have an aversion to you finance people that do numbers and spreadsheets.
Sure.
Right. But you bridge that gap so well, and you articulate it so well. And if I remember correctly, you open this business in the middle of the last like economic downturn.
That's right. Yep.
And I have a first row seat now. We work together, and I just see that the foundation you've laid gave you the ability to thrive. And I have a bunch of clients that have hired you, and they're going through something similar. And so, from what I understand, you have a master class coming out, kind of an on-demand class on how to recession-proof your business, specifically agencies currently, right? That's the main focus.
Yep.
And so I just kind of want to give you the floor here and kind of break down why it's so important to be prepared for this economic winter, what the benefits are, like what happens if you survive through this economic downturn, how do you prepare yourself, and then kind of walk us through. I think you have like, is it six steps of really just dialing it in and preparing your business to survive and thrive through pretty much anything.
Yeah, so maybe just to play off a little bit of what you said in the beginning about kind of my mindset on things. I never really set out to be a CPA, although I am a CPA. I was always that kid scheming on business ideas, and my parents trying to keep me from doing something too crazy. So I ended up getting an accounting degree and then an information systems degree, just because I thought that that's going to be the best skill set to start a business. And then there were a series of facts and circumstances that ultimately led me to starting an accounting firm. Kind of the recognition of, hey, I'm pretty good at this accounting thing. And also there's just a huge miss out in the market for small to medium-sized companies in terms of the nature of the service that they're getting and the way that it's being delivered. And it's very transactional typically. And to your point, most people just hate tax and accounting. I mean, the data that's out there says that overwhelmingly the task that business owners hate the most is finance, tax, accounting. Stressful. And it often feels like it's sort of taking you away from what you really want to be doing. Like, here's the reason why I started business. I have all this passion and I'm excited about it. Now I have to deal with this whole tax, finance, accounting thing. And so I sort of imagine, because I feel like this goes on in my own brain, of this tug of war between like the rational side or the things that I'm supposed to be doing, and then there's the like visionary side or the passion and the reason why I want to be a business owner. And there's this tug of war that's going on. And oftentimes what happens is that if that one side gets pulled too far to the left or too far to the right. And really what you want is there to be sort of this equilibrium, or that there to be equal tension. But often it's like, okay, I'm going to really lean into the things I'm passionate about, and oh crap, now I don't have any money, so now I need to sort of lean to the other side, and then you over course correct. And so there's sort of this ongoing, I feel that in my brain. I know that my clients, when I describe that to them, feel that same sort of thing. So I'm just like every other business owner, kind of trying to deal with that same tug of war, even though it just so happens that I'm, classically trained to be an accountant and or have all the credentials. I've done all the work in finance and accounting prior to starting this firm. So I understand that. And frankly, the stuff that I learned in business school, the sort of Fortune 500 stuff, it just doesn't really work for a small to medium-sized company. It just doesn't. When you're working in finance at a Fortune 500 company, it's all about optimization, and let's really optimize. Let's really maximize every aspect of the business. Let's make sure we've got all the best terms with our vendors, so on and so forth. And you can squeeze those vendors because oftentimes you're their biggest client, and maybe you took them from being kind of a startup to being really wealthy. In the case of us small to medium-sized companies, it's all about relationships, and everyone is dealing with that sort of tug of war that's going on. And when you squeeze somebody, it's not a business. You're squeezing some individual, and the impact that it really takes on their life. And so it's just, the principles are a lot different in my opinion. And so with that as sort of foreshadowing, I started the business in 2010 full time, but I spent 2 years preparing for it, saving up cash and kind of incrementally building out some assets around our process, a few clients. But ultimately, I was able, because I had cash on the sidelines when I started the business, I was able to be really nimble and kind of calculated in the clients that I'm taking on and the service delivery. Uh, and so I was in a position to be able to do that, rather than, it's sort of like the difference between having an abundance mindset and scarcity mindset. I was in a position where I had some abundance, although it wasn't necessarily a long rope, but enough that I wasn't having to sort of make all these scarcity type decisions of like, I have to have this client, I have to do this. So that actually leads into kind of the live class that we're doing that starts here on May 15th, 6-week class. And week one is around guiding principles, and you use the term bumpers, maybe similar structure of, okay, if Fortune 500 finance doesn't work and we have this tug of war that's going on constantly, then to keep us at sort of equilibrium, we need to create some principles of how we think about money, so that we're not just constantly being agitated by it or avoiding it. Like, we have some foundational aspects. And just to give you maybe a few examples of that. First is the idea, first we optimize, then we maximize. So maximize is like, I got to get all of the money today. So it's a very short-term mindset. What are we doing? Every decision is about today and tomorrow, whereas optimize is thinking more like a year, 15 months out. So so many of the folks that I see out there, they're really trying to optimize or maximize for today when they haven't actually optimized. So let's figure that out first, and let's always go back to that. Another
What is real quick, what is an example of optimizing? So maximizing would be, let me squeeze every penny out of everything right now, right? What would optimize? What's an example of optimizing? Like, somebody comes in, what's something that is not optimized? It's like low hanging fruit. Think of an agency owner.
Yeah. So when I think about optimize, I'm thinking kind of long term, 12 to 15 months out is sort of my definition of like optimizing. And typically what they're focused on is, I need to get to 7 figures, or I need to get to 8 figures, but I need to do that now. And so it's sort of actually a hodgepodge of optimize and maximize.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense? So
yeah.
I want to get to 7 or 8 figures, but I want to do it like today, which inherently that's almost, it's impossible to do, right? So an example of optimize in that sort of context of, I want to get to 7, 8 figures, building out what I call a revenue waterfall, which is, let's look at what do we actually have committed for the next 12 months, actual signed contracts. What do we have committed in revenues? And then what is our current kind of run rate or monthly expenses on average? We don't necessarily have to like get this super accurate. Oftentimes folks are trying to like get it so accurate that it takes hours and hours. Like, let's get this at least 90, 95% correct. This is better than perfection. Like, let's just get this dialed in enough that we can sort of see the forest through the trees. So let's figure out what our expenses look like for the next 12 months. Let's see what our revenues look like. What's our shortage? From there, what's our plan to cover that shortage? Because frankly, we need to cover that shortage first before we even think about trying to grow. Mm-hmm. So often trying to get to 7, 8 figures, but there are so many bumps in the road because we keep having to jerk back and forth between, I want to get to 7 figures, like, oh crap, I don't have any money right now. Now I'm taking on the wrong types of clients and making the wrong types of commitments. So let's build out a waterfall. Let's see how much in additional revenues do we need to have to cover our expenses. Once we've covered our expenses, that sort of flows into the next goal. What is our next goal? Maybe that's spend more money on marketing to increase sales. Maybe that's hire somebody on the team. maybe that's some personal elements, which is, hey, I need to take care of my family, and that could take many shapes and forms. So what are the actual sort of waterfall buckets? Let's get them lined up. So cover our expenses, then what's next? What's after that? Let's map those out, 3 to 5 buckets at least, and let's see what the current uh, rate would be. How long would it take us to fill all those buckets currently? And then what are the couple of action steps we can take to increase that substantial, 20-30%. So
You know what I love about that, and for those of you listening that have had experience, like horrible tax experience or financial experience, like I don't know anybody. I could think of some people that might do something similar, big like Wealth Factory or whatever, but I don't know anybody. And this is so valuable to me as a business owner that says, hey, what do you want? And I think we talk about that when we talk about rigging the game, right? But like, what do you want? And then let's actually lay out a plan to get you there. Like, let's lay out the sequence of events that needs to happen. And like some complete criteria, like once this is done, then we do this. Where most people are just like, yeah, sure, give me all of your stuff from the past year and I'll do the best I can with it, right? Like you're actually guiding people. And that's, I can't tell you if you're new to business or you've done it forever, how valuable that is and how rare that is. And I just think it's fantastic. So go ahead. What next guiding principle?
The other example of guiding principle I wanted to share today was the idea of hedging downside risk, and ultimately this idea of like, how do we create asymmetric risk? So asymmetric risk is the upside is so much greater than the downside. And that's something I'm personally passionate about. I started my career in derivatives and hedging, and in that case, trying to help billionaires make more billions, and it wasn't necessarily fulfilling to me. But this idea of limiting your downside, taking gains off the table, so that or locking in your gains, so that ultimately that starts compounding, and the upside is so much greater than the downside. Because the reality is, and the reason why I think this is super important is that, Nick, you're 100% commission, right? And the reality is, like, maybe your title is not sales in your businesses, but you're 100% commission, right? Like if you don't have clients at the end of the day, you're taking all the risk, right?
Mm-hmm.
Getting paid. I'm 100% commission. Every business owner, for all intents and purposes, we're 100% commission. So by virtue of opting into being a business owner, we're taking on a lot of risk. If you had a job that was a full guaranteed salary and you told your spouse, hey, I want to take this 100% commission job, they'd be like, oh, wow, we need to make some changes here, right? If we're going to go to 100% commission. Most business owners aren't necessarily thinking, from my experience, in the framework of, I'm 100% commission, therefore, here's the things I need to do to limit my risk. So maybe a quick analogy on this front. I'm not a big gambler, but if I happen to find myself in a casino and say I'm playing blackjack, I've noticed that there are sort of 2 ways that most folks approach gambling. And one is that they come with some money. Say, it's just for example's sake, they're like, I'm willing to lose $100 tonight at the casino. And so they get all the chips, and basically they play, they win some, it all goes into the same pile. And ultimately, over the course of the night, because the house has a competitive advantage in the odds, by the end of the night, that pile has gone to 0. Right? On occasion, maybe they win big and they walk away with some money, but oftentimes maybe they walk away with 0. Maybe they go back to the ATM, they get some more money, but everything's going into the same pile. Right? You win, but the winning's back in the same pile. The way that my approach to it is, I have 2 piles. I have the winning pile, and I have the money that I came with. So I bet the money that I came with, eventually that's going to go to 0 because I'm not putting the winnings into that same bucket. I've got a separate bucket. Once I get through all of the stuff that I brought, all the money that I brought, now I have a decision. Do I want to play the money that I won? Worst case, maybe I walk away at that point, or I opt back in and go, you know what, I came here just to have fun. It's the cost of entertainment. I'm gonna gamble this winning pile, but I'm gonna do the same thing and keep opting in repeatedly. Basically, I'm eliminating or minimizing the downside risk, right, by having this separate pile. That's what you need to be doing as a business owner. You've got to be putting aside your separate pile of cash because you're 100% commission. You need to take some of those winnings, maybe all of them or a portion of them. You got to put them aside. And then at some point you decide, okay, do I want to take those winnings and reinvest them into growing the business or whatever other priority you have? When you're just putting it all into the same bucket, guess what? You may end up at the end of the month or at the end of the year or next time with, I don't have any money. I have profits according to my financial statements. I don't have any money because I spent it all. Mm-hmm. So we need to eliminate, our downside risk.
So optimize and then maximize, which I think is brilliant. Hedge against it. I love asymmetric risk. I love the concept of it. Other guiding principles. Any others that you want to share before we get into the meat and potatoes of recession proofing?
Yeah, understanding the difference between correlation and causation. And I know you've talked about this a lot. So several years ago, I worked in marketing finance for this guy, Steve Loudon. He's now the CFO of Roku. And,
oh, cool.
And our job in this finance, basically to tell, it was with the Fortune 500 company, basically to tell the chief marketing officer whether or not they could do some marketing campaign. And it was at a bank, I guess just a little bit more context. And we had every 3 to 6 months, someone from online banking, and this is like, just to date myself a little bit, 13, 14 years ago. And so everyone has online banking now and bill pay services, all that, but 13, 14 years ago, less prevalent. And so the marketers had this data that said people who use online banking and bill pay carry a much higher balance in their accounts, and they use more of the bank's services than someone who does not have online banking and bill pay. So what they wanted to do was run some campaign to try to get all of the anyone who had not opted in for online banking and bill pay to do that, and they were offering some insane benefits of like you get a couple $100. It might have even been up to $500 if you sign up for online banking and bill pay, and so their whole argument was, hey, magically when someone signs up for online banking and bill pay, like they're going to carry a higher balance, and that in and of itself that just doesn't make sense, right? Like, right. By virtue of signing up for that, and we know that now everybody has online banking and bill pay for the most part. Certainly, online banking is very prevalent compared to like 15 years ago, but that hasn't necessarily impacted people's balances. And so what they're recognizing is a correlation. Someone having online banking correlated to them having a higher bank account, but it wasn't the cause. The reality is that these folks were early adopters. Their mindset is different. There are just a bunch of other factors related to the person who signs up for online banking sooner. And that doesn't cause them to have a higher bank account. It's just merely related or correlated to the situation. So there's all these business decisions that I see folks making that are based off correlation that aren't necessarily the cause of why they have more money in their account. And so you really have to step back and just ask yourself, like, what is the cause? Like, and go through that like series of constantly like, okay, we had a really good month this month. What caused that? Is this just, did we get lucky? Like, did all of the things close this month that have been building up for the last 6 months? Or is there some other thing or series of things that we're doing that caused this month that we can now say is a trend that we can expect to happen on an ongoing basis?
Right. And as far as, I have a friend, he's the youngest to ever get his PhD, and he got it in metabolic chemistry, right? And his big thing is he's huge on like people like, hey, this thing happened. What do I do? And he's like, well, what's the previous data point? How many do you have? Because one, right, like one set of data is a point, two is a line, and three becomes a trend. And I think being patient enough to, and that requires data, right? You need some sort of data to identify a trend.
That's
Otherwise, you're making goofy decisions off of one data point. So we actually had the pleasure, and we're going to really get into it. And I think this is going to be the actionable stuff. And if you're in here, and you have a pen and paper, like I would write this stuff down. And as we go through this, I would do these exercises. I put a link, profitprioritycall.com. That's how you actually get on the phone with Dan here if you want him to kind of help walk you through some of this stuff. But you were kind of breaking down your phases for us last night. We were fortunate we did a podcast together and kind of broke some of them down. And my favorite, the one step number one, there I guess it's two, right? Week number 2 of this master class is rigging the game. And I love it because most people, if we go back to the Fortune 500 example, right, a win to them is different than a win to me.
100%.
Right. And so nobody's really taking the time to identify, well, what does success look like to you? And I love the way you articulate it and break it down. And I kind of want you to jam on why it's so important to identify that, and then just give us that killer sports analogy we got last night, so people can really work through this and figure out how to rig the game for themselves.
Yeah, for sure. So to me, the step after you've kind of built out your guiding principles, now we need to figure out. Nobody objects to the idea of rigging the game to win, right? Everybody wants to win. But then you really have to step back and go, what does it actually mean to win? And usually it's something other than just purely revenues or profits. Like there's a reason why you started this business. For me personally, I mentioned that I always sort of had this desire to be an entrepreneur, but underneath that is a lot of other factors that aren't necessarily money related. Money is a part of it, but it's not all. I've got other objectives like helping my parents retire, proving to myself that I can do this thing, changing the trajectory of my family tree. Like there's just different things that I have that represent winning to me. So we need to understand that, but then we also want to dig a little bit deeper and go, okay, well, what are your tendencies? What is really driving that? What's going to cause you to win and what's going to cause you to lose? And it's things like avoidance or taking unnecessary risks that that may or may not be your tendencies that are going to cause you to lose. And so some of that is self-awareness, being aware of those tendencies. But it's easy to say I have self-awareness and aspire to have self-awareness, but then have a lot of blind spots, right? And not actually see it coming. I've done 10 years now of coaching and counseling, and I still find myself with these blind spots. And so I learned a trick a couple years ago that was pretty profound for me in trying to figure out my tendencies. And so maybe we can go through that together, Nick, and we'll play this little game with you as the case study and see how it kind of aligns with maybe your tendencies. So, so Nick, when you think back to your childhood, what was the sport or hobby, not necessarily that you played the most, but that you sort of most aligned with, or had the most passion in playing?
It was, I played football the most, right? But for me, the thing that I loved to show up and got in the zone and got in flow, honestly, was I wrestled for 2 years. It was wrestling to me. Like probably on par with Ultimate Frisbee. That was the other one.
Okay.
But I would say wrestling was really the thing that I just tuned out the world and just I could just do it all day long.
And what was it about wrestling or ultimate frisbee that like stood out to you, or what was the sort of the driving aspects of it?
It may be my severe ADD or ADHD.
Okay.
Those are the two things that required, let's talk about wrestling specifically, really, really required. And, like as a kid, especially a lot of anxiety about stuff, required me to shut everything down and focus. And so like, it was super slow, methodical, and focused for me. That was, that's where I just like to be in that place where, the other thing about wrestling is, while unpredictable, you can always put yourself in a position where you have control, or you've been repeatedly taught how to get control back if you lose it, right? So it's just always, how do I get my leverage? It's just a constant battle of maintaining or regaining leverage.
And how would you describe sort of like your style of play compared to other wrestlers?
Very, very slow. Um, Potentially lethargic most of the time. And actually, so not that it really, I wrestled for a very, very good team. I think they won the state championship 13 years in a row. Uh, Slow, calculated, methodical, looking for an opportunity to strike, and then striking very, very violently.
Okay.
Like it was always looking for the opening to surprise. Like that's how I like to play, is a kind of like a catch people off guard.
Okay. So how would you describe your style in business compared to your style in wrestling?
Honestly, very, very similar. I will spend most of my day, for example, I will spend from afar, people are like, man, you must never sleep. Right. But like close up in real life, I just kind of like methodically go through the days, looking for something that I can strike on. And that's been all of our successes in business have been um, identifying a little leverage point or a little crack and just jumping in. So very, very similar, I think.
And and uh, when you're not in business, sort of acting or performing in accordance with sort of what you just described, how do you feel?
It's stressful.
Yeah.
There's a little bit of anxiety, a little bit of stress. I feel like if I'm not if I'm not slowed down and calculated, then I feel like I'm always like missing the opportunities, right? Like, what opportunities to get leverage am I missing? Um, and if I miss an opportunity, I kind of beat myself up about it, because like, oh, there it was.
Yeah.
And I feel similar in both the sports and business, that and it may be misconception, that opportunity lasts about this long. Right. So I really feel like I got to get in there the second I recognize it.
Yeah. So here's the point of all of those series of questions. The reality, from what I've experienced, just simply asking someone like, tell me about your tendencies, like tell me who you are. You get a bunch of espoused values, things that they want you to believe about who you are, and a lot of that is biased by like social norms. So you get a lot of like, I'm someone with a lot of respect and integrity. Excellence is important to me. Authenticity. These are my sort of tendencies, and then you get sort of like interview type questions, right? And it's really difficult to like really hone in on like, what's my real style of play, right? Like, it's really hard to kind of hone in on. We're not really conditioned to kind of talk about that. When you're a kid, ignoring sort of socioeconomic conditions and parent influence or family influence, you usually kind of get to pick the sport that you want to play, and you also kind of get to decide how you're going to show up and what your style of play will be. And so to some extent, it's almost like, not to get woo-woo here, but it's almost like the most free or true expression of who you are in that moment. And those are almost your real or true authentic self, I found. This exercise was done with a coach that I was working with several years back, who was really high up in Microsoft during the Bill Gates days. So worked, from what I understand, a fair amount with Bill Gates and figuring out talent acquisition, all of that. And he took me through that exercise, and it was incredibly eye-opening for me to realize my default sport was basketball. I'm 6'2", so I was always put under the hoop in team sports. But really, in my mind, who I was a shooting guard. So if I'm just playing with friends, like I want to take the ball up the court, hustle guy, like I'm not the most athletic person out there. I'm not going to dunk on you or anything like that. I'm going to dive on the floor, but I'm willing to take the last shot. I'm okay if we lose the game because of me. And so that's actually my style of play in business, similar to your style in wrestling, which is I'm willing to take some risks, dive on the floor, hustle. That's what drives our business forward. It's when I feel the happiest. When I'm playing somebody else's game, it's when I'm the most miserable.
Mm-hmm.
But back to eliminating downside risk, which is sometimes I do need to pass the ball. Sometimes it's not always best for me to take the last shot. So my greatest strength is also my greatest weakness. So by sort of understanding our style of play in life, I think we can understand our style of play in business. And then we can kind of back into like, okay, because of these tendencies, here are my blind spots. And I found that that's just a lot easier for folks to start to hone in on what it actually looks like to rig the game to win and to have, frankly, happiness in their business because they're playing their game and they're not reading all these business textbooks and all these articles. I'm like, this is how I have to do business. I have to follow these Fortune 500 rules. I have to do all things. As I mentioned, I've done a lot of personal work in counseling and a fair amount in anxiety. And the whole idea of should is one of those things that just immediately creates anxiety. So every time you're like, I should be doing this thing, but I hate it. It's like, you're just creating suffering, and chances are like it's causing you not to win.
Yep.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. And like everybody wants to win, right? That's what they say. Everybody wants to win. But there's a concept of the Pyrrhic victory, obviously, where at what cost? But there's also just the fact that nobody wins a race they don't want to be in.
Yeah, that's
right.
True.
You just can't win. If you run somebody else's race, you can't win. Even if you're at the top, you're not winning. Personally, you're not winning.
Very true. Very true. So yeah, so week 2 of our class is really working with folks to understand what winning looks like. I call it profit priorities. Map out our profit priorities. It's not actually just money. It's about how we take the money and assign it to things that are important to us, and we figure out what our timeline is and frequency of different priorities, and then it's understanding your tendencies, the reasons why you're not going to win, so that you can begin to really play your game, but also make sure that you pass the ball. In my example, or in your case, you're not being overly calculated and you're not missing the opportunities when you could be striking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's such I can't going through these exercises. Even if you just go through like the conversation you and I just had about sports, it'll change part of what we do right in the network is like, what race do you want to run? And that alone makes a huge difference, right? Just being aligned with your unique disposition. But having somebody like you and what this class is going to break down, build the financial system or like subsystems that will help facilitate that is like insanely valuable. It's just, and I love the sports analogies. So that's phase that you said that's week 2.
That's week 2.
Okay. Week 3 is
week 2 is keeping kind of the sports context. If we're going to rig the game to win, now we need to, and we've defined what winning looks like and some of our tendencies, we need to evaluate our roster. So we need to sort of take stock of what money is being left on the table. So where sort of our cash flow leaks in the business. Are we overpaying in taxes? I've got this 2 Oreo principle idea that I know we've jammed on before, which is this idea of, well, I can sort of get into that story, but it's the idea that we've got these little expenses that we've forgotten about, and we need to make sure that we're closing those leaks and figuring out what things we need to implement to make our business more scalable. This is really the point. I didn't talk about this principle previously, but there's something called the rule of 3 and 10. And it's really a principle. The rule just sounds more authoritative. This is the idea that every time it triples or hits an order of magnitude 10, everything breaks. So if you think about going from 1 to 3, 3 to 10, 10 to 30, 30 to 100, so on and so forth, things are breaking. And that's a huge cash drain on the business if you don't see it coming. And then you've got to overpay with time or money to go back and fix things. So part of this evaluating your roster is also trying to determine what has broke, but what's also about to break, because let's not overpay to fix that.
Yeah, I think that's a huge, there is a thing that I'm just going to throw out there because I know some people listening have this mindset. There's this thing that like, it's like right now it's just market and sell till you break stuff. And when you break stuff, that's a good sign. Yeah. Right. In my experience and what I've seen, it's actually just really, really expensive and time consuming to break shit that doesn't have to be broken.
Exactly.
So I think that's a huge, huge step.
What I love to do is take one of those comments like you just shared of what you want. If you're breaking things, it's a good thing. Right? And then I like to apply it to real life and go, would it be good if I broke things outside of business? Like if I just, and the answer of course is no, right? Like I wouldn't want to break things personally. Like I wouldn't want my health to fall apart. I wouldn't want my house to fall apart, right? It'd be costly to fix those things. So a lot of these cliches, if you take them out of the context of business and you apply them to real life, if they don't stand up in real life, they probably don't stand up in business either. So that's a gut check moment.
Yeah, and I think that's what you do so well is like it's just bridge that gap, right? Between like people look at their business completely separate than real life, first of all.
There's a natural order to life, right? And so the same is true in business. Like they're sort of this business is more of an existential being or entity. It's intangible, but the reality is if there's operations, there's money, and there's human capital. Just like personally, there's wealth, wisdom, health. Like there's sort of this overlap. You can map those against each other. And so there is sort of the same natural order to business as there is to your personal life. So when you have all these cliches that you've heard in business that sound really good because they're about growth, you got to kind of gut check it. Does it actually hold up? Would I do that personally? If you're not going to do it personally, why are you doing it in your business?
Yeah, that's great. That's great. So evaluate your roster and then
it's built. Then it's let's implement. Let's build the championship roster. Now that we know what's missing, let's implement. So week 4 is about implementing, closing the gaps, adding to your roster, to your team, the things that are missing that are going to be the highest impact.
And you actually, you're for your one-on-one clients, your personal clients, and in this masterclass, you're actually walking through the process of how to make these decisions.
That's right. Yeah. There's going to be some templates that folks can take and just customize a bit to their situation, but implement right away. Some metrics. There's some universal metrics. There's 3 of them really that every agency needs to implement. And so it's working through those. And again, back to like the idea that there's a natural order of things. There's a natural order to agencies. You have a unique offer, but the fundamentals are the same for every agency out there. Let's not try to be creative. There's a term, and I think it was, I think his name is Ben Shapiro. And he has this phrase, I might be getting the name wrong, but I'm getting the quote right, which is, let's not innovate where we only innovate where you differentiate. So we don't need to innovate on the finance side of our business. Like, don't try to come up with your own fancy metrics, and don't try to come up with your own accounting system. I have a lot of folks on the tech side of things who are like, I just write some code and create my own accounting. Okay. Do you differentiate on accounting systems? Like, is that getting you business? No, that's not actually contributing to growth. No one's hiring you because they're like, oh, you have the best, most unique accounting system out of any agency I've ever worked with.
Yeah, your internal accounting is so impressive.
Right. Exactly.
That's funny. That's just adding complication.
If it's bad, if you're invoicing people incorrectly, that's when they take notice. You're not paying people on time.
Yeah. So we rig the game first, which I think is brilliant. The way you describe that is, I think everybody should go through that exercise. Evaluate your roster. It's define reality. Like, what's actually going on? Where are we losing money? Then building out and implementing all of the things, like plugging all the holes, right? You find the holes, you plug them. And what's phase 4 of that?
That's playing your game. So now we've got the system stuff in place. We've implemented the metrics and closed the gap on our cash flow leaks. Let's get going. Let's see what's fallen apart and what questions you have now that you've got actual data. It's like you can drop all the X's and O's to like training camp to some extent. I know we're both Seahawk fans. Hopefully that doesn't bias anybody else on the call right now, but that's right. It's like, okay, today's draft day, the NFL draft day. It's like, okay, we're going to add to the roster. Then they're going to come into training camp. We're going to practice a bunch. Now we got to actually play the game and then see what's actually falling apart and what do we need to adjust. And so we got the plan in place. Let's actually get going. And that week's going to be a lot of coaching and some one-on-one support to help folks identify and interpret the information.
Well, that's the fun part, right? If you've set the foundation, you've rigged the game to win, you've evaluated and built your championship roster, playing the game's the fun part. That's kind of like, that's where you just do your thing, right?
That's right. Yeah.
So what's the next? So you're playing your game. Inevitably, goals will change. Situations changed. Maybe success looks different. Maybe opportunities have changed. Maybe there's been some turnover, your star player retired. You don't just play your game indefinitely. What's next?
That's right. Yeah. So the last week is about kind of restocking, re-enrolling the team. And so we're going to talk about how you recalibrate. Mm-hmm. And just to keep with this sports analogy, and I'm not just sports analogy, but it kind of works in this context right now. This is going to just be sports analogies. But using sports as an example, we have a season and then we have an off season. And during the off season, players go back to their homes and they go back to their lives outside of whatever sport that it is. And then there's this coming back to training camp. And because there was a break, coach knows I kind of have to re-enroll team on what it is that we're doing. In business, we don't have these breaks. We're playing the game for all intents and purposes 365 days a year. The reality is that we have to keep re-enrolling. We have to keep re-enrolling our team. We have to keep re-enrolling ourselves and reminding ourselves about what our game looks like, what our guiding principles are. And this is really the point, the final step where we talk about how to identify friction points in your business and how to prioritize addressing those friction points. So we're playing the game, but at some point things are going to break. Rule of 3 and 10 tells us that someone's going to leave, clients are going to leave, or we're going to add a bunch of clients. But things are going to break or we're going to lose sight of things. So we got to recalibrate, re-enroll our team. We need to have a framework for how we do that. I don't know.
And you're providing that framework and the worksheets and the templates and all that.
We have a framework. We call it the Financial Certainty Roadmap. It's a framework to identify friction points and recalibrate.
Awesome. So here's what's going to happen for those of you watching. Obviously, we own Mastery Mode, and we deal with we have a few levels. We have the network, we have the velocity. Network being, hey, let's identify the best way for you to grow your business. and mastery mode, the velocity being really systems, operations, decision-making parameters, right? And what I'm so excited about is taking this framework and kind of merging it with some of the stuff we do, because there's so much congruence. And I believe, do you have a call with Dan in 7 minutes?
Yeah, I do.
Okay. So this Dan that you're talking to right now is going to talk to my Dan, who's my business partner and our COO, because this is like, we've seen everything. This is the framework that entrepreneurs, small businesses need to be using. And we're that being, because you're about to get on the phone in about 5 minutes, there's not going to be enough time to do a full Q&A with Vault members and anybody that's joined us. So if you are interested, drop a comment below, and Dan, can we talk you into coming back in within a week?
Sure.
And just hitting some Q&A. If people show up and say, hey, look, I had a question about this, I had a question about this. Doing an awesome Q&A with Vault members. And then when is the launch date of this class?
So the enrollment's basically starting now. So we're opening up enrollment essentially now. Class will start May 15th.
Okay. So I will let everybody know. We'll let everybody know how to enroll. You can just reach out to Dan right now and say, hey, I'm in. You can drop a comment on this video. But let's do a Q&A. And at that Q&A, bring your questions. If you watch this video, bring your questions. If you need clarity, if you have a specific question. And we've already talked about it. We're going to give a ridiculous discount to, was it the first 10?
First 10, yeah. The
first 10. So if you just want to jump right in, reach out to Dan. I don't think the URL is live yet. Reach out to Dan. And then if you need a little more clarity, you want to jam a little bit, come to Q&A. We'll set up a date and a time. But it's what are you going to sell this masterclass for? Full price?
I think so we've got a deal for you guys. And then for this first 6-week course, the cost is going to be $1,000, and then we're planning on charging around $3,000 or more after that. So
yeah,
we charge significantly more for clients that we're doing for you. So this is about 20 years worth of my IP that I've been working on between all the different stuff that I've been doing. So a lot of thought that's gone into it, but I think we're going to drop a bunch of value.
Yeah. And I could tell you at $1,000, which isn't even the discount you're giving our the first 10, right? Which is even better than that, $1,000. If you're an implementer, it'll pay for itself tens of thousands of times over. If you're not an implementer, stop buying stuff, like just stop buying courses and stuff. But if you're the action taker, if you want to be prepared, because we talk about it, you're going to see my posts coming up that economic winter, it's cyclic, summertime, houses inflate, everything's expensive, everybody's doing well. And then like clockwork, the winter comes, and the people that spend $1,000 or even $3,000 now to prepare for that, it may very well save your business. It'll definitely make your life more comfortable. So drop a comment if you want to talk to Dan, and we'll set up a Q&A so we can just sit for like 30 minutes and do some one-on-one with
Awesome.
members.
Awesome.
Cool. I appreciate you, man. I'll make sure that you get this replay, and because this was shared on the page instead of directly to the group, a lot of the feedback's going to be, it'll be like 48 hours before people really start rolling in and commenting.
Cool.
All right, man.
Let me on.
All right. Have fun with Dan.
Yeah, thanks.
Yep.